what we're going to start. It's a good thing.
Flying 197 climate to 350, being 30, still at the contra, 29. Guyana 455. Guyana 455, we had an explosion and we are descending immediately. We had fire on board. Guyana 455, we returning to the field. The time is 1724.
Raúl Dauzá Céspedes, director de México, Centroamérica y Caribe del Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores de Cuba, y el excelentísimo señor Abdul Halim Mayid, embajador de Guyana en Cuba. Nos acompañan también embajadores de Barbados, Guyanas y de la República Democrática de Corea, países víctimas del atentado terrorista. Miembros del cuerpo diplomático acreditados en Cuba, familiares de las víctimas, el Comité de Paz, Justicia y Dignidad de los Pueblos, representantes de organizaciones cubanas, trabajadores del ICAP, miembros de la comunidad y una representación de estudiantes guyaneses. Recibamos ahora al excelentísimo señor Abdul Halim Mayid, embajador de Guyana en Cuba, en discurso de apertura y bienvenida a este sentido homenaje. Por favor, embajador.
Madam Chairperson, Ms. Indira Perez Rodriguez, hero of the Cuban Revolution, compañero Fernando González, President of ICAP, representative of the International Relations Department of the Communist Party of Cuba, Dean of the CARICOM Diplomatic Corps in Cuba, high-ranking officials of MINREX, Ambassador Rafael Dosa, when you will be coming late, relatives of the victims of Crimen de Barbados, Ms. Odales Perez Perez, the daughter of Captain Wilfredo Perez Perez, medical students from Guyana and Belize, distinguished invitees, compañeros y amigos. I would like to express my deep gratitude for your distinguished presence here this afternoon in the name of the 73 citizens of Cuba, Guyana, and the DPRK who perished when Cubana Flight 455 was bombed over the territorial waters of Barbados. I would also like to thank ICAP for collaborating with the staff of my embassy in hosting this memorial ceremony and for always supporting Guyana-Cuba initiatives. Hero of the Cuban Revolution, compañero Fernando González, we are always grateful for your kind gestures. I have asked Excellencies that we observe a 1-minute silence for the thousands of victims of imperialism and Zionism in Gaza, the West Bank, and in Lebanon. It is our duty to respect and honor them. Those victims are as innocent as the 73 who perished in the bombing of Cubana Flight 455. And we mourn the loss. Excellencies, distinguished invitees, 48 years ago, self-confessed terrorists and CIA operatives, Luis Posada Carrillas and Orlando Bosch, arranged for 2 bombs to be placed on Cubana 455. One in the front of the aircraft and the other at the back of the aircraft. They were timed to go off 1 minute after the other. The CIA operatives made sure that there were to be no survivors on this flight. Indeed, there were no survivors. I lost a family on that flight. In fact, my smaller brother was supposed to be in that flight. On that flight was the first batch of our medical students who were coming to Cuba under an arrangement with Comandante Fidel Castro. They all died horribly in that bombing. Jose Marti told us that death is not true when the work of life has been well accomplished. Excellencies, in this case, the work of life for the 73 had hardly begun. And that is why we must mourn this tragic, irreparable loss. Excellencies, compañeros y amigos, the purpose of that bombing, the purpose of that deliberate, despicable terrorist act was twofold. To terrorize the Cuban leadership and to turn the tide of the Cuban Revolution, and at the same time, to halt the progressive wave of social and economic development that was taking place in the Caribbean. It failed miserably. Today, Cuba and the Caribbean region are stronger. Their cooperation is at an all-time high level, and their future rests on a solid and secure foundation. No imperialist maneuver can ever create a rift between Cuba and CARICOM. In this regard, Excellencies, please permit me to say a few words about Cuba. Cuba is a powerful nation state, endowed with an abundance of natural resources, thousands and thousands of hectares of arable, fertile land, important minerals, including nickel and cobalt, sugarcane and tobacco. Cuba has a large literate and highly qualified labor force, a stable industrial and political climate, and a tightly run system of governance and management. Cuba has a culture second to none. For one thing, Alicia Alonso's achievements in the world of dance and theater is the gold standard in the performing arts. Cuba's medical architecture involved the construction of the Center for Biotechnology and Genetic Engineering and the Carlos Finlay Vaccination Institute. The production of life-saving medicines and vaccines, and the continuing unrelenting drive to surpass their previous accomplishments. Excellencies, Cuba for over 60 years has withstood the might of US imperialism. It has emerged more united from the US organized Playa Huron attack in 1961. It has survived the missile crisis of 1962. It has prevailed over the manifold attempts to assassinate Comandante Fidel Castro, leader of the Cuban Revolution. It has proved victorious over the economic and biological warfare that was aimed at crippling the Cuban economy. And it has defeated the recent COVID-19 pandemic. Excellencies, distinguished invitees, I have taken a moment to remark on these realities of Cuba, these monumental achievements by any standards about Cuba, because far too often the focus is on negative reporting of Cuba, hyped up by the Western media. Excellencies, compañeros y amigos, we remember today and honor our history. For without a nation's history, the nation would have no soul. It would be empty. We have convened this annual memorial ceremony because we want the present generation to remember, understand, and internalize the past. Long ago, the Spanish philosopher George Santayana told us, those who forget the past are condemned to repeat it. Excellencies, we hold this annual memorial ceremony to also honor and respect the 73. I would normally say 74 because one of the Cuban air hostesses was pregnant. But we normally refer to the 73. We hold this annual memorial ceremony to honor and respect the 73. We cannot allow their sacrifice to go in vain. We have that responsibility and we have that right. Excellencies, we believe that the likes of Luis Posada Carillas and Orlando Bosch have no place in modern history. Yes, they may come in different forms and in different guises, but now we are more aware, more understanding, and this raises our consciousness to deal with them. In closing my tribute to the 73, I solemnly pledge to you to uphold this noble tradition, to remember, to honor, and respect you and your sacrifice every October. Excellencies, compañeros y amigos, on November 18, 1896, General Serafin Sanchez Valdivia, a fierce Mambi warrior, fought his last battle at Paso de las Damas near Sancti Spiritus. He and his small Mambi army were confronted by overwhelming Spanish military forces. Unafraid of the Spaniards, the Mambis charged the haughty enemy. Mortally wounded, General Serafin Sanchez's last words to his Mambi combatants were, "They have killed me. It is not important. The march continues." Compañeros y amigos, excellencies, this must be our guide as we observe the terrorist bombing of Cubana Flight 455. The march continues. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, embajador, por sus sentidas palabras. Y en representación de los familiares de las víctimas, también nos llega el mensaje de Odalis Pérez Rodríguez, hija de Wilfredo Pérez Pérez, capitán de la nave de Cubana de Aviación 455, blanco del ataque terrorista aquel 6 de octubre de 1976.
Buenas tardes, excelentísimos señores. Para los familiares de las víctimas del atentado de Barbados, no hay olvido, y sí la memoria de las sonrisas, los abrazos, proyectos y las ganas de vivir de sus familiares. Han pasado 48 años desde que elementos terroristas al servicio de los Estados Unidos con explosivos de alto poder suministrados por la CIA volaron en el aire un avión de Cubana de Aviación y provocaron la muerte de 73 personas inocentes, hermanos guyaneses y hermanos coreanos. No solo fueron víctimas del terrorismo, sino también de la crueldad de un imperio que produce cada día monstruos mercenarios y que la necesidad de denunciarlos y combatirlos en todos los ámbitos ha convertido el dolor de los cubanos en renovadas energías para luchar y seguir adelante. Han pasado 48 años y la herida permanece intacta, dolorosamente grabada en las entrañas de todo un pueblo. Ustedes saben lo que es estar esperando a una persona y que de momento te digan que no va a llegar. Lo sigo añorando. Eso nunca se olvida. Yo era una niña pequeña. Mataron a mi papá, un cubano íntegro, joven, de 36 años. Y el último recuerdo que me dejaron fue lo que vimos ahí. Su voz desesperada de que tenían una explosión a bordo. Mi papá era el capitán del avión, Felo. Siempre me he imaginado ese momento. La distancia con el aeropuerto Sewell era de 28 millas, 45 kilómetros. Tras 7 minutos de maniobra para salvar las vidas de sus pasajeros y no pudo, perdió el control del avión por una segunda explosión. La mayor prueba de cinismo del imperio es poner el honorable nombre de Cuba en su lista de patrocinadores del terrorismo, cuando los terroristas responsables del crimen de Barbados vivieron y murieron en los Estados Unidos sin pagar por sus crímenes. No al terrorismo que jamás ha dejado de amenazar a nuestro pueblo, que aún persisten en sus planes de odio y destrucción contra Cuba. Han pasado 48 años. El dolor no se ha extinguido. El crimen sigue impune, pero existen por eso las razones ahora multiplicadas para que esa injusticia continúe temblando. Muchas gracias.
Continuará conmoviéndonos eternamente la injusticia del crimen de Barbados. Gracias, Odalis, por tu mensaje. Se hace presente también la cultura en nuestro homenaje con la joven saxofonista Claudia Iglesias García, que nos interpretará Aleluya e Imagine de John Lennon. Con música damos vida a este homenaje como parte de la Jornada Internacional del ICAP por la Paz contra el bloqueo y el terrorismo. Gracias, Claudia, por este especial momento. Invitamos al podio a la excelentísima señora doctora Sharon Milagro Marcha, embajadora de Barbados en Cuba. Por favor.
Excellencies, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. On the west coast of the island of Barbados, there is a solemn monument at Paynes Bay in St. James. It is a grim reminder of one of the darkest days in the island's history, and indeed in the Caribbean region and further afield. On October 6th, 1976, a dastardly crime was committed when Cubano de Aviación Flight 455 was brought down by a terrorist bomb attack just off those shores. 9 minutes after takeoff from Barbados's Sewell Airport, a catastrophic explosion of 2 bombs plunged the aircraft from an altitude of 18,000 feet to the depths of the Caribbean Sea. All 73 persons on board perished. It is their memory which we honor today. The monument erected in Barbados was unveiled during the 1998 visit of then Cuban President Fidel Castro. It was rededicated on October 6, 2022. There was special significance for that rededication ceremony 2 years ago. It took place at a time when Barbados and sister CARICOM countries, Guyana, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago marked the 50th anniversary of diplomatic relations with Cuba. This simple obelisk is an expression of Barbados's commitment to reiterate and reinforce the sentiments of solidarity with Cuba. Two countries inextricably and eternally linked by a cowardly act of terrorism. Each year on October 6th, much like we are gathered here today, a very moving ceremony is held at the monument in Barbados to reflect on this tragedy. This year is no exception. The remembrance will be held on Sunday morning. There will be participation by representatives of the governments of Barbados, Cuba, Guyana, and Venezuela, as well as the CARICOM Secretariat. There will be a drum call, libations will be poured, a poem will be read, and wreaths laid, as a bugler from the Barbados Defense Force plays the last post. The monument is an obligatory place of pilgrimage for most visiting Cuban citizens and official delegations, as they seek to keep alive the memory of those who have died. As the principal victim of one of the most heinous acts of terrorism in our Caribbean region, it is unjust that Cuba should be listed as a state sponsor of terrorism. That designation should be withdrawn, not only because it is unwarranted, but because of the suffering which it has caused to innocent people. Cuba bore the heaviest burden in that terrible tragedy, which claimed the lives of 57 Cuban citizens. 11 Guyanese citizens were among those who perished on that fateful day. 5 citizens of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea were also listed among the dead. But there were more than numbers. They included members of the Cuban National Fencing Team, Guyanese medical students, cabin crew, and skilled pilots whose lives were prematurely cut short. All of the names of these martyrs, passengers, and crew are inscribed on the Pains Bay Monument. Today's proceedings also honor those 73 souls. They are gone, but not forgotten.
Gracias, embajadora. Seguidamente, invitamos al podio para su intervención a la excelentísima señora Luan Bors Martínez, embajadora de Belice en Cuba, decana del Cuerpo Diplomático de CARICOM.
Muy buenas tardes. Good afternoon. Excuse me. Good afternoon to our hosts, Fernando Gonzalez York, Hero and President of ICAP, Your Excellency Halim Majid, Ambassador for the Cooperative Republic of Guyana, Ambassador Dausa, and other senior officials from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and from the Partido Comunista de Cuba. Ambassador for the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, ambassadors and representatives of the Diplomatic Corps, and families of the fallen, Odales, ladies and gentlemen. How appropriate that this remembrance for the victims of the bombing, thank you, that's kind of you. How appropriate that this remembrance this evening for the victims of the bombing of Cubana Flight 455 is taking place at the Cuban Institute for Friendship with the Peoples and hosted by its president, Fernando Gonzalez, who has personally given so much, sacrificed so much to prevent terrorist acts against his homeland. Thank you, Fernando. I think Odalis and ambassadors for Barbados and Guyana have so poignantly described these moments and this terrible act so well that I will just ask you two questions today, and I will ask of you one commitment after you leave here today. What does an act of terrorism do? After the initial shock of the attack, the pain reverberates endlessly, as you've heard from Odalis, for the families of the victims, for the families and first responders, those in Barbados who came out so quickly to help. There is also recurring trauma for the communities witnessing these egregious acts. There is the disruption of any sense of safety and normalcy. You have heard proof of this today. For the countries where these acts occur, there's a ripple effect also of economic disruption, as risk affects business in small ways and large. The aim of such cowardly, venomous acts is to create instability and chaos, and most often to try to displace governments, though they rarely do. They are acts of hatred directed to the unwitting and the innocent. What 9-year-old child should be a victim of any terrorist act? The downing of Cubana Flight 455 was the worst act of terrorism the region has experienced and had experienced by 1976, so at that time. And there had been a number of attempts leading up to that had failed. I join those before me who say that it is absolutely antithetical that this country, Cuba, should be on any list in any relation to a state that could sponsor terrorism. It has been the victim. My next question to you is, why is it so important for us to gather and remember and relive this terrible crime? You hear the pain in the voice of the families. It is because, as Ambassador Halim said, if we fail to share the truth of these events with younger generations, we may be doomed to see them repeated. We must honor the 73 innocent souls on Cubana Flight 455. The bombing robbed them, you see, in the most dastardly way, of their right to live and the possibility of fulfilling their hopes and dreams. They are so much more than victims. We must remember who they were and that they had a right to make their mark in this world. The bombing of Flight 455 snatched from this world talented young athletes nearing the apex of their careers, students, diplomats, business persons, a brave, brave Capitan Piloto, one child and another baby in the womb. How many times since 1976 have we referred to those responsible? And how difficult has it been to extract from the perpetrators of this terrible crime any remorse for their despicable act of cowardice? 48 years have passed, but I promise you, for the loved ones, each 6th of October tears open a wound and it reinserts the pain of what those lives could have and should have been. Now, this is where I ask for your commitment. Our countries have worked so hard to make this a region of peace. If we are to maintain it, we must remember those who sacrificed for us, and most especially those who were sacrificed in senseless acts of terror. The 15 countries of CARICOM and Cuba have agreed to do this. These countries. We now observe the 6th of October as CARICOM-Cuba Day Against Terrorism. When you leave here today, and each year after this, please consider taking a moment of your time to share your knowledge about the victims and the terrorist attack that brought Cubana Aviación Flight 455 with someone who doesn't know about it, because we must not forget. Thank you.
Gracias, embajadora. Invitamos al podio para el discurso de cierre a Fernando González Llor, héroe de la República de Cuba y presidente del Instituto Cubano de Amistad con los Pueblos.
Buenas tardes a todos. Quiero comenzar por agradecer las reflexivas y emotivas palabras de cada uno de los embajadores que me han precedido, y especialmente las de Odali, hija de Wilfredo Pérez Pérez, capitán de la nave de cubana del vuelo 455. Buenas tardes a todos los que acuden hoy a la sede de nuestro instituto para rendir homenaje a las víctimas del crimen de Barbados a 48 años de tan siniestra acción. Estimada Yeninaira Cárdenas, en representación del Departamento de Relaciones Internacionales del Partido Comunista de Cuba, estimado compañero Rafael Dauzá, director de México, Centroamérica y el Caribe del Ministerio de Relaciones Exteriores, estimado embajador de Guyana en nuestro país, estimada embajadora de Belice, estimada embajadora de Barbados, estimado embajador de Corea, otros miembros del cuerpo diplomático representados aquí, familiares de las víctimas, representantes de organizaciones cubanas, miembros de la comunidad, trabajadores del ICAP y especialmente estudiantes guyaneses que nos acompañan. Sin duda, el crimen de Barbados fue uno de los actos terroristas más brutales perpetrados contra la Revolución cubana. Fue orquestado y financiado por la Agencia Central de Inteligencia de los Estados Unidos y ejecutado por personas sin escrúpulos al servicio del imperialismo yanqui. Nos reunimos hoy para recordar a las 73 víctimas inocentes que perdieron su vida como consecuencia de tan atroz sabotaje al vuelo 455 de Cubana de Aviación un 6 de octubre del año 1976. Este trágico suceso dejó una marca imborrable en la memoria de nuestro pueblo y en la memoria de los pueblos del Caribe. Entre las víctimas había 57 cubanos, 11 guyaneses y 5 ciudadanos de la República Popular Democrática de Corea. Cada uno de ellos representaba un mundo de sueños, representaba un mundo de esperanzas y representaba un futuro que fue truncado por el odio y por la violencia. A pesar de la condena en los tribunales, reinó la impunidad de los asesinos. El perdón no floreció porque el adiós fue violento. Una novia que se quedó esperando, una vida que recién germinaba, no llegó a ver la luz y muchas familias quedaron eternamente esperando el regreso de sus hijos. Cuba perdía al equipo juvenil de esgrima tras competir en el 4º campeonato centroamericano y del Caribe de ese deporte. Nuestros jóvenes volvían a casa felices con sus medallas. Los 11 guyaneses eran estudiantes y profesionales. 6 de ellos habían sido seleccionados para estudiar medicina en Cuba, entre ellos un familiar del actual embajador de Guyana en nuestro país, el amigo Halim Majid. También murieron 5 abnegados ciudadanos de la República Popular Democrática de Corea, un pueblo hermano con el que compartimos nuestras luchas contra el asedio del gobierno de los Estados Unidos. A los familiares de las víctimas les extendemos nuestro más sentido pésame y nuestra eterna gratitud por su fortaleza y por su dignidad. Desde esta tribuna honramos su memoria y reafirmamos nuestro compromiso de luchar contra el terrorismo en todas sus manifestaciones. Y debo mencionar también, saliéndome del texto que tengo escrito, que debo agradecer, como he hecho en otras ocasiones, a los familiares de las víctimas del avión de Barbados, que pusieron su dolor durante muchos años en función de la lucha porque nosotros regresáramos a casa. Muchas gracias. Esta acción terrorista es parte del odio y la agresividad promovidos contra Cuba por sucesivas administraciones estadounidenses. Dicha postura continúa con campañas de mentiras y manipulaciones, linchamientos mediáticos y la incitación al vandalismo para crear el caos internos y exterminar nuestra revolución. Se trata del mismo gobierno que de manera injusta y unilateral nos ha colocado en la espuria lista de países que supuestamente patrocinan el terrorismo. Una postura incoherente, ya que nuestro pueblo ha sido precisamente la víctima de actos de esta naturaleza que han cobrado la vida de valiosas personas y han provocado cuantiosos daños económicos. Nuestro pueblo, enérgico y viril, como lo catalogara el comandante en jefe Fidel Castro Ruz en la despedida del duelo de los caídos en Barbados, aún llora a las 73 víctimas. Y porque tenemos memoria, en ocasión de este homenaje que tiene lugar en el marco de la Jornada Internacional del Instituto Cubano de Amistad con los Pueblos por la paz, contra el terrorismo y contra el bloqueo, alzamos también nuestras voces para condenar el genocida bloqueo del gobierno de Estados Unidos hacia Cuba por más de 6 décadas. En pocos días, la Asamblea General de las Naciones Unidas votará nuevamente el proyecto de resolución contra el bloqueo y agradecemos la condena de tan hostil política por parte de los países que hoy nos acompañan. En la actualidad, son cada vez más frecuentes las acciones terroristas de Estados Unidos y sus aliados en diferentes regiones. El país, supuestamente defensor de la democracia y de las libertades, apoya la violación de los derechos humanos en Palestina, donde tiene lugar una sangrienta guerra que parece no tener fin y que busca aniquilar a todo un pueblo. Pero nunca nos cansaremos de denunciar tanta afrenta y de clamar a toda voz: ¡Viva Palestina libre! El horrendo crimen de Barbados no solo fue un ataque contra Cuba, sino también contra la humanidad. Por ello, sigue siendo importante ampliar, articular y consolidar la unidad y la solidaridad internacional. Se impone que nos unamos en la lucha por un mundo más justo y un mundo más seguro frente a la arremetida de la derecha fascista e imperialista. En nuestra región nos corresponde contribuir con los esfuerzos para que América Latina y el Caribe sean siempre una zona de paz. Al recordar a los mártires de Barbados, reafirmamos nuestro compromiso de continuar con valentía y determinación en la lucha contra el terrorismo. Que su sacrificio no sea en vano y que su memoria nos inspire para construir un futuro de paz, un futuro de justicia y un futuro de amor por todos. No a las guerras y a las agresiones. No al levantamiento de muros. No a la injerencia y a las medidas coercitivas. No al terrorismo. Viva la amistad, la paz y la solidaridad. Gloria eterna a los mártires de Barbados. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias. Tras las palabras de nuestro presidente, Fernando González Yor, llegue a todos los presentes el agradecimiento por su solidaridad, apoyo continuo. Sirva este acto de homenaje a las víctimas del crimen de Barbados para no dejar morir la memoria histórica de nuestros pueblos contra la injusticia, la impunidad y el terrorismo, y fortalecer la unidad y la resistencia frente a la violencia de los odiadores. No al terrorismo, sí a la paz. Gloria eterna a las víctimas del crimen de Barbados. Gloria. Finalmente, y a su memoria, los invitamos al cierre de este acto a confraternizar por la vida y por la paz. Muchas gracias.